I mean, after sack the board chants last week, banners this time around, is it too easy to lay the blame at the door of the boardroom?
I'm not sure where Alan Stubbs gets the fact that we've spent 500 million quid. Mashiri's had his pants pulled down and spent 500 million quid. He's the guy that's wasted a lot of money. Of course, the outcomes are not where they should be. They're nowhere near where they should be. And people have to take responsibility for it. And Mashiri and the people that he had around him, from Marcel Brands upwards, have to look at some of the acquisitions and look at the decisions that they made with Ancelotti that we called earlier in the day was not going to be the appointment that had an outcome attached to it. And some of the players that they bought.
But Farhad chose to spend that money.
And he did, right? So let's look at the reality of sacking the board. OK, go on then. And replace them with who? And who's going to walk through the door and buy the football club and pay the price for it and spend lots of money. Now, we know that, and I've been very critical of Farhad Mashiri. I think he's had his pants pulled down on transfers, on managers, on the overall direction of the football club. But you can't deny that his commitment is to try and get something better. The outcome is poor. Now, the tragedy is Frank Lampard is not a good enough coach, and those are not good enough players. So you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation. They're conflicted now because they can't buy and sell players because they're just under the wire of financial fair play. So there's governance over what they can and can't do. Sack the board and do what? Go on then and do what? Bring Alan Stubbs in? What's he going to do? The same as he did at St Mirren and lasted for 5 minutes before my mate got rid of him. Come on now, let's get things into context. It is a very disappointing situation at Everton. It's not good enough. Mashiri's made some dreadful mistakes. They've bought some very poor players and they haven't got the right direction of travel going there. But to turn around and simply say, not because the boardroom's my mate, not because I like Bill Kenwright, and I couldn't care less about Denise. I think they've made bad decisions. But to sit there and say the answer is sack the board is just laughable.
But you're sticking up for another boardroom.
No, I'm saying that you call it for what it is, but now you've got to look at the solution. The problem is the team is in a relegation battle 2 seasons in a row. The problem is that they've spent a lot of money on players that haven't repaid the investment that's been put in there. Normally what you do is you go to an owner, you don't put your hand in your pocket, you don't do what's right for the football club. This fella's done far too much with the wrong direction, with the wrong thinking, with the wrong people around him. People would have you believe that Marcel Brands was the best thing since sliced bread. Most of those players that were brought in were at his bequest. And you look at the managers and you look at the players and you say, well, what about you lot? What about what you've produced over the last 2 or 3 years? Because on the whole, there's been far better players in that football club than the level of performance. And the game against Man United, to me, is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. You can turn
because it's a cup.
Because it's a cup game. And Man United, the games that showed me where Everton were the 2 games before the break. They got smashed to pieces by Bournemouth in both games. That was the time.
Is Simon right? Look at that. I mean, you're an ex-player. Are the players the problem?
Of course, they're a big part of the problem, of course. But I think when you go back to recruitment, I think that's why it is so key that you get the recruitment right. And you get the right characters and you do all the homework in terms of personality and behind the scenes. Because as players, I whenever I hear, is he playing for the manager? Honestly, I smile every time I hear that. As a player, or to become a footballer, you've had to be the most selfish person out of all the people that try and make it. You've got to be the most selfish, the most greedy. You have to be that person to make it. And then no player goes out, I don't think, thinking, oh, I'm playing for the manager today. They don't. They think I'm playing for me and I'm playing for the team and the club. They don't think I am playing for the manager when things are going well and they have. Are
they listening to the manager?
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Do you think they are, Dean? That's a good point by Simon.
I think Frank's tried to bring in the right characters: a Conor Cody, a Tarkowski. Yeah. Players that he feels he can trust and that he's going to get a performance out of. Has it been a good enough performance? No, it hasn't.
And we've seen a marked increase in players that I've been very critical, like Alex Iwobi. I know he's got injured now, but he's been massively influential in some of the upsides of Everton in recent times that got them out of the trouble that were in the back end of last season. Has become a very valuable player to them. But Everton, yes, I get it. I get the reasons why they're being criticised. You can't criticise the commitment of Mashiri. You can criticise the bad judgment. And now he's got to straighten that ship. It's no good Farhad being absent. It's no good him not being at a game for 7 months because he doesn't fancy listening to the background noise. And it's very easy to keep laying the blame at Bill Kenwright. And I know that people will say, well, because he's your mate. But also the backstory is that there are other reasons why Everton aren't as successful as some of the clubs that are more successful, is because they've not had the financial wherewithal to be so. And again, that will be laid at Bill Kenwright's door. I think Everton should be doing far better than they are now. I think that I like Frank, and I was one of the dissenting voices about how he was booted out of Chelsea. But I don't think he's a great coach. And I think you've got a double whammy there now. I think you've got not a good enough playing squad, which is the responsibility of the managers. I mean, he brought in Dele Alli. I mean, he brought in Donny van der Beek last year. Contribution to Everton's plight was virtually zero. In fact, it probably was more detrimental. So I look at it and say, what is the point of saying sack the board? What is the point of that?
I mean, the point, Simon, is they are acutely worried that they're going to go down this time.
Yeah.
And why not? It's relegation form.
Yep.
They've won 3 in 18. You have to think you're down. You're looking at, unless you turn this ship around soon, and they've got a chance this weekend against Southampton at home, you are heading to the Championship.
That's why the supporters are so worried.
Yeah.
And that's why they're looking at who should take the blame, because they are they were close last season, and they're going to be very close, I think, this season to relegation. That's what all this money has that's been spent.
The blame's been directed at culprits who they think are accused of gross mismanagement.
On one hand, you're saying, and I know that I'm sort of arguing against my own argument. On one hand, you're saying that more often than not, boards are people that you rail against because they won't invest in the football club. This board, be it Fahid Moshiri's board, has invested in a football club. They've just made very bad decisions. So
but kept making them.
You're questioning. Are you questioning the commitment of this board, or are you questioning their acumen? If you're questioning their acumen,
what we are saying is the buck stops at the top.
Well, yes, of course it does. In the end, the buck stops at the top, and ultimately, the guy that runs the football club is the guy that has to pay the consequences of it. And Fahid Moshiri has paid the consequences of it. Now, if they can tell me, these Everton fans that are saying sack the board, and people like Alan Stubbs, well, we got these fellas in here that want to come in, and they want to buy the football club, and they want to pour millions of pounds into it to correct this ship and to be able to give it some more stability than the current plight that it's suffering from, then that's a different discussion. But sacking the board makes me laugh, because who's going to write checks out? Who's going to fund the deficit in the football club that's probably losing tens of £millions? They lost 350 million quid over the last 2 or 3 seasons. Some of that is obviously COVID related, and some of it is because of the depreciation of the playing squad.
But surely there'd be a buyer out there for Everton. There's a buyer for every club, is there not? There'd be a buyer for Everton.
Okay.
Exciting times, new stadium, etc.
Well, where are they then?
Well, you keep telling us potential American investors all over the place.
We sat here, didn't we, in the summer, and who was talking about buying Everton? And I said, nonsense. I tell you it was meant to quote Peter Kenyon, running around trying to do crowdfunding to buy another football club, suggesting that he was going to buy Everton. I said to you, none of nonsense. The fact is that if there is a credible buyer that has real cash that wants to come in and buy Everton, they're still going to suffer from the same plight of having their transfer spend controlled by the Premier League because of the financial fair play constraints that they're governed by, which is the Premier League have got them on a watch list, the sort of special measures they're in. You're still going to have the same challenge. I don't think Lampard is doing a particularly good job either. So it's compounded.
But we never, Simon, hear from Everton's board. We never. Now Fahad seems to have disappeared into the ether. We never hear anyone standing up from the board saying, "We are the people who lead you out of this. Our decision making will take Everton out of this problem, and we will stay in the Premier League. Trust in us. Trust in us."
Until recently, up until recently, you did hear a lot from Moshiri. In the last year, you've not heard a lot at all.
Because of us.
I grant you.
Now he seems to have gone to ground. I mean, it's going to take something.
That is what frustrates supporters
right.
the most, I think, is hearing nothing at all. I think it is your role as an owner, personally, that you give information, albeit you might not want to give a certain amount of information, but I feel like the supporters have a right to hear where their club is at.
I think it's very easy to communicate when you're winning. I think you should be communicating when you're losing as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly. And a lot of Evertonians would agree with what Dean just said. I mean, we're all agreed Benitez was a total waste of time, says this fan, but it's a valid point. Sack the board because we need somebody else in there, and we've got to get on with it. Evertonians getting somewhat impatient, and who can blame them? They've won 3 times in 18 Premier League outings. Next up, it is must win, whatever way you look at it. This coming weekend at home to Southampton, must win.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.